In this game, I would like to show you how I outplayed a Grandmaster. This is the game that is one of the best games I have ever played, even though it is the game that I played online, and it is the game 3 minutes plus 2 seconds increment. I guess you will like it, and in the meantime, maybe you'll just learn something. Let's get into it. I started the game with playing e4, opening up the bishop, opening up the queen, and getting into the controlling the center with the pawn. My opponent, a respected Grandmaster from Netherlands, opened with e5, the same idea, opening the bishop, opening the queen, and having the control in the center with the pawn. And then I just wanted to show him that I am not afraid of his abilities and skills, and I open up with the pawn, attacking the pawn in the center, and two bishops getting their power. And now, what my opponent played? My opponent simply captured. At this moment, so far so good. Now, knight f3. My idea being to open up the opportunity to make a castle after the bishop is gone, and at the same time, controlling the center and attacking the pawn I sacrificed. Now, my opponent played this idea, bishop b4 check, because now, if I push the pawn forward, he can capture with the pawn, and after the recapture, my knight will be unable to stay on c3 square. Therefore, I push the pawn forward, he just captured as expected, now I recapture with the pawn. Why? Because this way, I am just attacking the bishop, at the same time I am trying to make this idea work with the battery along the diagonal and attacking the v-square f7. My opponent needs to move with the bishop because the bishop is attacked. Now, therefore, he is making bishop e7, and now at this moment you can see that after knight f6 I can attack the knight and there will be some problems. And now I am just opening up the bishop to make the attacking potential. If I have two moves in a row, I could put the queen on d5 with the battery queen f7 checkmate, even though it seems like pretty funny because he is a Grandmaster after all. And now he immediately tries to open up the bishop's route and at the same time counter-attacking in the center, in the cost of the pawn, because he won the pawn when I sacrificed at the beginning. Now I capture with the bishop, and now the idea is to attack the pawn and the rook. If he pushes the bishop onto g4, he will be not able to recover. And now he just stepped back with the knight, attacking the bishop in the center and attacking the pawn. Take notice that all of these guys are protected, therefore no problem with this, we can just develop. Now I make a castle, make the king safe, because this way you are playing against Grandmaster, you do not want to risk. After my opponent make a castle, I make h3. What's the idea behind it, you may ask? First of all, I do not allow him to have the bishop on g4, because this way my knight would be pinned. At the same time, bishop cannot get neither of these squares, g4 and f5, therefore at this moment he's limited at his scope. Now c6. My opponent asked me what I am going to do with the bishop. Of course, the bishop is attacked, therefore I retreat. The bishop is going into b3, protecting the queen. Queen is protecting the bishop. So far, so good. You may say that the knight can capture the pawn. Is it true? Yes, that's true. Knight can capture the pawn, but at this moment, I am trying to make a little bit of active actions for the pawn. Queen e2. Now I am attacking and counter-attacking with the open e-file. At the same time, I want to put the rook onto the d-file with all of the attacks over his position and trying to show that the pawn sacrifice was a really interesting idea. And now, my opponent stepped back. At the same time, he's trying to reduce as much material as possible, and therefore he's going to make my life a way harder. But before that, he needs to deal with the threat of capturing the queen with my rook. And he stepped back into c7, a very good idea, because this way he can combine the attacks alongside the diagonal, combining the battery. Therefore, at this moment, so far so good, everything is perfectly fine for both sides. Even if black is a little bit better, white is having two bishops that is going to show its power in a moment. You can see that I am going to get to his king and try to make him trouble. And now, after bishop c2, he just develops another knight. Take notice that he cannot get the knight into c6. Knight on d7 would be temporarily blocking the bishop, therefore he doesn't want to risk anything, because the bishop and with the knight with another bishop and the queen can make some kind of difficult stuff on his king. Therefore he didn't want to risk. Knight bd2. Why is that? Because I need to make as many pieces as possible next to the king to make some kind of sacrifices and try to checkmate him if I want to. And now he's just developing the bishop. Take notice that both the bishops are pretty much solid, even though not the most active. And now, at this moment, I'm bringing more pieces into the game, trying to exchange the knight and then recapture with the queen, attacking the h7 square with the checkmate threat. Because this way, after knight captures knight, queen captures, and if he doesn't do anything, there is the threat of queen h7 checkmate, game over. Now he brings another piece into the game, because he's not interested in exchanging, rather about having all of the pieces into the game as Grandmaster do. So far, so good. Bishop g5. At this moment, this bishop seems pretty powerful because it protects the knight and at the same time not allowing my pieces to get into g5 square easily. Therefore, I want to attack his pieces and exchange some of them. And if he recaptures, I can always bring my knights closer to the knight's position, therefore he's not going to be interested at this idea. Now he pushed f6. Normally such a move is not a good idea, because you are weakening the king alongside the diagonal. But at this moment, if you have all of the pieces next to the king and they are very well coordinated, it is the exception that can be done. Now after this, I capture the knight. He cannot recapture with the bishop because of the knight, the bishop hanging, and with the check I can capture right here as well. Therefore, he must recapture with the knight. The knight is of course protecting the bishop, therefore everything is perfectly fine so far. Now I need to step back with my bishop being attacked, and I try to make this maneuver. Look about how nice idea I am preparing. I am just stepping back from being attacked from the pawn, but at the same time I'm making a trap. If I capture the knight and he recaptures, the bishop is not protected, I can capture with check. Therefore, at this moment he needs to be careful about the bishop with the tactical trick. And now he just makes the bishop a little bit more safe, having the bishop next to the king. At this moment everything seems fine. Now I bring another pieces into the game because I want to have as many pieces into the attack as possible. And now my opponent is bringing the rook, because rook standing opposite the queen is always pretty much dangerous. You need to be careful about not losing the queen. Now knight f5, getting closer and closer to the position of the king and trying to infiltrate with the queen and with the bishop, attacking the pawns next to the king. Now my opponent is playing knight e6. Take notice that he is having all of the pieces very close to the king as well, therefore he knows that I am pretty serious about this game. Now I just exchange the bishop because this bishop is pretty much powerful. At the moment, if the bishop gets into this square and I am losing this bishop, I will be losing, maybe not losing by exchanging, but I will be losing the firepower. Therefore, I want to exchange the bishop. After the recapture, I am exchanging the pair of rooks, and now I am just seizing the d file. And even though black is a little bit better, according to the engine, I felt at this position I am having a very, very good prospects. First of all, the bishop is pretty active. Second of all, I can put the bishop on another diagonal, and if I put the queen onto h5, I can attack these squares with my queen, making a lot of mess into his camp. And now he played b6. Probably he was a little bit too concerned about the pawns, or maybe he just relaxed too early, and now I try to gain the advantage. b6 is the attempt, of course, not to lose the pawn on a7. But of course it was not that much important, and now I just make the mistake myself. Why? Because I didn't want him to push the pawn forward, having the control over b5. At this moment both of us were a little bit confused, I guess. Now he stepped back with the knight, trying to make the knight into the better squares, and at the same time probably he's going to exchange the pair of rooks, the last one, and then getting into this endgame. Now I'm bringing the queen onto the diagonal, creating the battery with the bishop. At the same time, if opportunity allows, I can try to infiltrate into the last rank if the knight is not protecting this square. Now he just pushed the bishop to attack and counterattack my attacks. Therefore, the bishop is protected and I am stepping back with check. Now I'll be threatening to capture the bishop, and if he recaptures, his king would be weak. That's why he's pushing the bishop back, and now I'm trying the same idea. asking him if he's interested in threefold repetition. He says no, maybe not yet. And now after that, he just didn't want to repeat the position and stepping back with the king. Therefore, I capture the bishop, he recaptures, and now at this position, if the pawns are on the both sides of the board, many times bishop is better than the knight. Of course, there is a little bit of problem, because if we count the pawns, I have 5, whereas my opponent has 6. Of course, there is a little bit of problem, because my opponent has the pawns that are doubled, and at the same time, the king is a little bit weak. Take notice, if rook and the king are standing on the diagonal, always try to think about making the pin. Whatever the square you put the bishop is the next question, but try to think about exploiting the opportunity to make the pin. And now you'll see in a moment what's going on, why I'm just pointing this out. Now I put the queen d4 idea because I want to have control over this file, and at the same time I would like to see what is my opponent going to do with this. Now he stepped back with the knight, and it looks like that this is a crucial mistake. And now we may ask why. Look, we just discussed that if I can put the bishop onto the diagonal, I can make the pin. And now, if I can put the bishop onto d6, I can make the pin and I can win the material. And therefore, I'm just making this. Bishop is attacking the queen. Take notice the queen protects the bishop, therefore it cannot be captured. Now he makes the double attack. I'm not sure if he was prepared about exchanging the sacrifice, or maybe it was a mistake. Hard to tell. Now I just capture, he recaptures. And now, if I capture normally, just because I can capture, he recaptures, he gets into the way better rook endgames. With the best effort, maybe I can draw it, but I cannot win it at all. But if I make the intermezzo, so-called the move that is not recaptured immediately, I am winning material. And now, I am just attacking the rook and threatening to win the knight. Now, he stepped back, protecting the rook with the knight and attacking my bishop. And now I just win the exchange and we are getting into the endgame. And now, what is my plan? The plan is the following. I've tried to make the possibility to push the pawn into the promotion. But of course, it's not easy because there are other pawns that disturbs me. Therefore, I'll try to infiltrate into the 7 or 8th rank with my rook and try to attack the pawns from the rear. Of course, it's not that easy because I need to make the infiltration points. At this moment, I cannot get into the squares d6, d7 and d8 due to the knight and the king protection. But I'll be patient. I'll try to bring my king closer. My knight is dancing with the knight a little bit. Now I put the rook and my plan is the following. First of all, I'll try to activate the rook. Second of all, I'll try to make this idea work. Of course, in the meantime, my opponent will be making my task a little bit more difficult. Take notice that at this moment, the knight cannot get into these squares, therefore I partially restrict the knight's movement. And now, my opponent is asking me what I am going to do with the rook. As I just mentioned, I cannot infiltrate into the 7 and 8 rank via the d7, d8 squares due to the king and the knight blocking the infiltration points. Therefore, I make the plan of making the rook different way into the points I am interested in attacking and winning. Now, my opponent is asking what I am going to do, pushing the pawn forward. At the same time, these pawns would be protecting each other. Therefore, if the king is able to protect the pawn on g7, if this pawn cannot be won by me, I cannot win the game. But, of course, I will slightly try to make his life uncomfortable. Now, my opponent is trying to get with the king closer and closer, because his plan is the following. Capturing this pawn on c3, then getting the king into b4, and the pawn will be moving to the promotion. At the same time, if he's able to protect all of the pawns on this side of the board, he can capture more pawns, and then 3 pawns will be going forward, and I'll be completely busted. Therefore, I'll try to be the first, attacking the pawn. He pushes the pawn forward, and now the weakness is the following one. The pawn on b6 and the pawn on g7. You may ask why. Because these pawns are not protected. If the pawns are not protected, we can call it the weaknesses, even if sometimes the weaknesses cannot be exploited. You need to know about this as well. Now I am just attacking the pawn from the rear. At the same time, the pawn cannot move forward because I am just protecting the squares twice. Now, knight c4. Look about how grandmasters are making all of the pieces greatly coordinated. The only weakness that I am attacking right now, he is protecting with the knight. At the same time, I cannot push the knight away with any of my pawns because I do not have the pawns on the BD files. And now, if he can protect G7 pawn, if I am unable to win the pawn, this could be pretty easily a draw, or at least a draw. Now I am trying to bring my king closer, attacking the knight. Because if the knight is not protecting the pawn, I can capture the pawn with check. Now he's getting the king closer, I am just getting with the king closer as well, and now the threat is the following. I'll try to attack the king. If he step backs, the knight is lost. After knight check, if he step back with the knight blocking the check, I can push the pawn forward and he cannot recapture the knight due to the pin. And after knight d6 and pushing the pawn forward c4, I am controlling the square b5, and then I'll be trying to infiltrate into the other side of the board. Now my opponent gets knight b2 check. After stepping back king c2 attacking the knight, he just captured the pawn and at the same time protecting the pawn. And you may say, was it a blunder? Not quite. Look about the knight. The knight doesn't have too many squares if the knight is on the edge of the board, and therefore all of the squares are covered, either by his own pawns, either by my king that is attacking the knight and protecting these two squares with the knight capturing the pawn in a moment. Knight captures, and now, normally 3 pawns against the rook is pretty difficult to handle. But first of all, I am just capturing the knight, and second of all, the pawns are not that much advanced. If the king would be on the place of my king and the pawns would be advanced, I would be on the edge of losing easily. Now I recapture the knight, and now my opponent is trying to make the pawns rolling. If he pushes these pawns right here, and if he gets king c5, king b4 with the idea of pushing the pawns, I'll be in a big trouble. Therefore, king c4, not allowing b5, because if he pushes b5, I can capture. Of course, he pushes b5, I'll capture, and I won the game. And you may ask why he pushed this pawn, because at this moment he doesn't have that many useful moves. First of all, these moves with the pawns are pretty much limited, because in a moment I can either block them all or capture the pawns. At the same time, at some point he needs to move this pawn. If he moves this pawn too many times, I can bring the rook, capture the pawn, and even if I step back with the king because of his infiltration with the king and 2 pawns, I'll be winning anyway. Therefore, it was the game that I guess you may feel that it's pretty impressive, not because of winning against the Grandmaster, but rather about the logical play and not making a simple oversights. Therefore, if you want to win against the Grandmaster, it is one of the example how should you approach the game. Try to play as best as possible, try to generate the plans and generate the threats, and in the meantime, try to make as much effort as possible to make him sweat and make him work to winning the game. I hope you like it, and in the meantime, I guess you'll have a great time to look at this game. Keep fingers crossed about my development of the channel. If you like it, try to make the comment, try to make the subscription, and I'll be providing more materials. Thank you very much and take care.